千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. As you can see, a relatively long chapter. We had some chapters previously that were maybe half the size of this one. So there's more to talk about here. Let's start. I will go ahead and read it from beginning to end, and then we will look at the different sections. 道德经, chapter 25. There is something formlessly created, born before heaven and earth, so silent, so ethereal, independent and changeless, circulating and ceaseless. It can be regarded as the mother of the world. I do not know its name. Identifying it, I call it Tao. Forced to describe it, I call it great. Great means passing. Passing means receding. Receding means returning. Therefore, the Tao is great. Heaven is great. Earth is great. The sovereign is also great. There are 4 greats in the universe, and the sovereign occupies one of them. Humans follow the laws of the earth. Earth follows the laws of heaven. Heaven follows the laws of Tao. Tao follows the laws of nature. So that's 25. I think even at first glance, you can see that there are some lines that appear to be very simplistic. There are lines with only 2 characters, like 14 and 15. So what can they possibly mean when we talk about heaven is great, earth is great? And the meaning of one section into the next, at first glance, is far from clear. So we go from the Tao being great to passing and receding and returning. What is the connection? Toward the very end, we have a whole bunch of lines about following the laws. What does that mean? Okay, so we're going to dig into that. The goal, as always, is to have crystal clarity by the time that we are done. So starting now, looking for duplicate characters and also lines of similar length to determine the structure, to identify the sections. So to begin, we can take a look at the middle of this chapter. Sometimes we start at the beginning and we look down from the top down. Sometimes we start at the end. This time in the beginning, there's not a whole lot of corresponding sections that identify itself as poetic correspondence. But if we look down further, we definitely see more examples of possibilities. So if we take a look at lines 10, 11, and 12, we see that they have, number 1, they're all 3 characters in length, and number 2, they have a character in common right in the middle. So line 13 also has 3 characters in length. However, the middle character is not replicated there. So this suggests that we can single out 10, 11, and 12 as a section. So there should be a dividing line between 9 and 10, as you can see there. And looking at the meaning, 10, 11, 12, it's about great, passing, receding, returning. So we can identify that as a section on its own. Those lines are related, and we'll talk about what those lines mean. So looking further down, looking at the end of this chapter, we see repeating characters toward the bottom. As you can see there, for 19, 20, 21, 22, the last 4 lines of this chapter, we have the same character repeating in the second position. That character is fa. Usually means laws. And that's what it shows here in the translation. Laws of earth, laws of heaven, laws of Tao, laws of nature, etc. So there's a little bit more to it than that, and we'll get to it. For now though, just looking at the similar characters, we see that there are 4 lines like that, so we can identify it as a section. So identifying the middle section and the last section, we have a third section that is between the two, from line 13 to line 18. Looking at those, we can actually see evidence of repeating characters as well. So if you take a look there, we've got the same character at the end of lines 13, 14, 15, and actually we have the same character at the end of 17 as well. It's just used in a slightly different way. So that character that's now highlighted is da, D-A, da. It means big, vast, great. So the 4 lines that you see here, 13, 14, 15, 16, they certainly go together. They're talking about something being great. And that's the Tao, heaven, earth, and the ruler, or the sovereign. On line 17, well, first of all, line 17 is a lot longer than the previous 4 lines. And number 2, even though the last character is the same, it's actually being used in a different way. So for 13, 14, 15, and 16, da is being used as an adjective, and that's reflected in the translation. Great is an adjective. In 17, that last character, da, is being used as a noun, specifically plural, as in 4 greats. So the character right in front of it is the number 4. So even though it ends in the same character, it's actually used in a different way. So nevertheless, from 13 down to 18, it's talking about these greats, the 4 greats, and then its mini conclusion in line 18 is that the sovereign occupies one of the four greats. So what does that mean? We need to get to that as well. So for now, we should tackle it from the beginning to the end, 1 line at a time. There's a lot of big ideas to contemplate. This chapter is really for people who like to think about the big issues, the deep questions in life. Starting with line 1, and indeed, starting with the first character. This character is 有, a very common character in modern Mandarin. So one of the most common questions that one can ask speaking modern Mandarin is 有没有, which means do you have it or not? So here, the meaning is similar, 有 means to have. Well, let's start with the pinyin as we normally do. The pinyin, you'll notice, looks like U, but that's the pinyin way to denote pronunciation of yo. So it sounds more like the YOH that you see here. So that part of the pinyin system can be confusing. So the meaning is to have. When it's talking about something that exists, you may have something, so that item, that object exists as something that belongs to you. Or you can point to something and say that it exists, it's there. So that's the secondary meaning, there is. In this particular case, there is something formlessly created. If you want to add a pronoun to it, it would become something like we have something formlessly created. So it's better in this case to use there is, that this is something formlessly created, it's out there, it exists, it's present. So let's go a little further into this particular character. This character is used multiple times throughout the Tao Te Ching. When you say yo in the context of the Tao, it is used to denote something existing, something that is there. So used to denote existence as opposed to non-existence. Non-existence would be wu, which means you don't have it or it is not there. Yo is also used to denote being as opposed to non-being. Again, being will be something that is existing, something that is there, a quality, a person. Non-being will be like non-existence, not there, not existing. So the first question in regards to thinking about the Tao is to begin on the human thought process, is to begin on your identity, your concept of the self. So this goes back to the familiar saying, I think, therefore I am. That is actually a very similar thought to what the ancient sages are trying to get at. I think, therefore I am implies the following. First of all, we are aware that we're thinking thoughts. We are aware of thoughts going through our brain. So that automatically guarantees that we have self-awareness. You are aware of yourself when you become aware of your own thoughts. That awareness is sufficient to establish that you are there, you exist. If you do not exist, you will not be thinking any thoughts at all. So that existence implies consciousness, awareness. I think, therefore I am, it's out there, or it's here. You might say, I exist. I am present, I am here. So by extension, we know the world exists and others exist. There are schools of philosophy, solipsism, where the idea is that all you can really know are your own thoughts, and therefore everything that's coming from outside of you, what you hear, what you see, those could all be elements of your hallucination, and that for all you know, as a point of certainty, for all you know, you exist completely in isolation. You are the only thing that you can be sure of that is existing. The Tao doesn't get into solipsism like that. The Tao is all about becoming aware of your own thoughts, becoming aware of yourself, and then go from there. Here is specifically about the Tao in you being connected to the Tao everywhere. So awareness of the Tao within is the same as the awareness of the Tao all around. So that's the first line. So there's something formlessly created. So there's a little bit more that we should talk about there as well. To say that something is formless and was formlessly created, it is basically saying that the existence of this Tao concept, this thing called Tao, it is created from the formless. It is an example of creation where something came out of nothing and came from nowhere. So this is how Eastern concept of creation is always conveyed, something from nothing, that ultimately this has to be the case. So in that Eastern paradigm, something from nothing is accepted, not just as a possibility, but as an actuality that is happening all the time. What about the Western mind? Well, possibly the Western mind may be more used to the idea that something must come from something else, like a parent entity or an originator. This is not by any means a guaranteed thinking method for the Western mind. After all, the Western mind has also come up with advanced particle physics, where it is very common for things to come out of nowhere. But let's stick to this for a while. When we do comparisons, we often exaggerate the contrast in order to make the point about how the thinking is maybe a little different than the conventional ideas in the Tao. So in the traditional Western mind, where something must come from something else, the idea is that there must be a creator. And the creator is a cosmic architect, a cosmic designer, and the job of this supreme architect is to design and build everything. So God must play that role. So this is actually expressed, this has a long history in Western culture and has been expressed using the analogy of the watchmaker. So I want to simplify and convey that analogy for everyone, to expose everyone to these ideas. These are to me, these are all endlessly fascinating, and I would very much love to hear what you think about these ideas. But let me explain what the watchmaker is. So this came from a book that was written quite a long time ago by William Paley back in 1802. So you can see there's a long history behind this idea, and the idea wasn't exactly new when he wrote about it. So let me paraphrase what he wrote. I'm pretty confident I can do it very accurately and convey exactly what he was trying to say. So William Paley expressed in his book that suppose I am walking around outside, and as I am walking, my foot is hitting against something. I look down and I see that I have pitched my foot against a stone, just a little rock. So someone else sees that I have kicked the stone by accident, asked, hey, how is it that the stone is there? Who put it there? Why is that stone in that exact place? And I might say, well, I don't know. I have no idea. For all that I was aware of, it might have been there, ever since I can remember. Might have been there indefinitely, might have been there forever. It might just be naturally occurring in that spot. So, people would accept that as the answer. That stone, that rock, might have always been there. But suppose it wasn't a stone or rock. Suppose that what I kicked was actually something that you see in this photo, a watch. Suppose I found a watch on the ground. And same question, hey, how did that watch get there? How did it happen to be in that place? So now, suddenly, I can't give the answer that I gave before. I can't say, for all I know, that watch has always been there. Just by looking at the watch, I can see, the precision engineering, the craftsmanship. I can tell that this is something artificial, that someone had made it, that the watchmaker exists. In order for the watch to exist, there must be a watchmaker. So every manifestation of design which exists in the watch. So to me, it's obvious that the presence of the watch implies the presence of the watchmaker. What William Paley is trying to say here is that if you look at a human being, if you look at the intricate details of biology, isn't it true that the intricacy, the complexity of the biological system is similar to the intricacy, the complexity that we can find in the mechanical workings of a pocket watch? So the human body is a marvel of engineering. Well, if that is the case, then when I find a watch, I know there is a watchmaker. Thus, when I see a human being, I see the watchmaker of the human, which is the creator, the designer of the human. Thus, there must be an intelligent designer behind the complexity of a human being. All the parts in the pocket watch fitting together, working together, adding up to a functional watch, similar to all the different biological parts in a human being, fitting together, working together, adding up to a functional human being. So the watch is made by someone. I know that for sure, even if I don't know who that is. By the same token, the human being must have been created by someone. I have the same certainty. The body must be the work of an intelligent designer. So there you go. You have basically the beginning arguments for intelligent design. So that's how it appears in theology. So this is more the Western mindset. Now I'm going to explain the Eastern mindset, which is a little bit different. The Eastern mindset is all about nature. Now, you may be wondering, the watchmaker analogy, that's pretty compelling. How can you come up with anything that's different? Wouldn't that be the proof of God that everyone's looking for? Right there, the watchmaker. Well, yes, many people find that compelling, no doubt about that. But in the Tao, it's our job to go deeper and to understand the nature of the argument a little bit more. So let me explain. Let's take a look at nature. In nature, we have seen many examples of astonishing creative complexity. So keep in mind that nature is Tao and Tao is nature. We'll come back to that point. For now, though, let me draw your attention to this image. This image, this photograph taken from nature, shows a moth that is very well camouflaged. So if I were just passing by, not paying a whole lot of attention, not scrutinizing everything, I would easily miss the presence of the moth in this picture because its coloring looks so incredibly matching that of its surrounding. Now, there are other camouflage found in nature that is even more astonishing. This is just one example. So, in nature, many examples we have seen of how the evolutionary process produces responses to the challenge of survival. And sometimes, as you can see, like in this case, it can be just really astonishing, the solutions that living things have evolved over time. And in these cases, we see small changes from one generation to the next, adding up to an incredible transformation. So evolution alone can be a pretty skillful watchmaker too. In other words, the intelligent designer need not be a deity. It can be evolutionary forces. This is the basic idea behind the book called The Blind Watchmaker by evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins from 1986. So in order to dispel the idea that complexity cannot arise without the intervention of a creator, Dawkins uses example of the eye. Now, you have eyes, I have eyes, so we all know what that is, and we know eyes are incredibly complex. So that complexity, how did it come about? Someone who is following the footsteps of William Paley would say that, well, you see, the eyes have irreducible complexity. That means there are parts in the eyes that must come together in exactly that way, that each part must already be functional or the whole thing falls flat. The whole thing doesn't work. And this is yet another way to prove that there is an intelligent designer that put it all together. The way that Richard Dawkins thought about it was more like that of a Tao sage, in that he sees a lot of this complexity, a lot of this work, a lot of this sort of intelligence built into nature itself. So it is not exactly a mind, like a human mind, that's designing it. So to dispel this notion that the eyes can never come about by itself, he begins with a simple organism. And the only thing that this organism can do is to figure out the difference between light and dark. That is to say, it's got receptors to illumination, sensors to when it's light or dark. And it's the crudest way to be able to tell daylight from nighttime. Then this scientist takes the reader in the book through a series of minor modifications, and it builds and builds and builds with increasing levels of sophistication until at last we arrive at the total design of the elegant and complex eye, the eyes that you and I have, the eyes that you and I know. So in making everyone go through this process, he's also pointing to creatures whose seeing apparatus are living examples of intermediate levels of complexity. You know, that they haven't completely evolved eyes like we have. They use it as sensory apparatus, but it's not that sophisticated. So that is the astonishing power of nature at work. It does not require that you have this all-powerful entity to design everything in nature. Nature by itself designs its living things in a sense through evolutionary pressures, survival of the fittest. So that is the reason why Dr. Dawkins calls nature and evolution the blind watchmaker, because there are also plenty of examples where you have evolutionary dead ends and you've got very bad designs. So none of these designs would survive even the merest human scrutiny. And there are some simple examples, even human beings themselves. We've got one tube for breathing, and we've got another tube for eating. So it's a very bad design for human beings that both tubes come together in the mouth, which means you can choke. So if you were an almighty deity designing human beings, you might have thought twice and separated the feeding tube from the breathing tube. That way, choking can never occur, and it doesn't interfere with anything. So it's not exactly true to call it an intelligent designer. It's more like a blind designer, propelled by forces and occasionally coming up with really bad designs. Sometimes the designs from nature are absolutely brilliant. Other times it's baffling. Sometimes designs inspired by nature and evolution just don't work. So they don't survive long, they don't get passed on, from one generation to the next, they soon become extinct. And yes, extinction is a real part of evolution as well. So the difference between Tao sages and intelligent designed proponents and the blind watchmaker, people who understand the blind watchmaker, the difference is that Tao sages do not claim to know who is responsible for the design. It's just the Tao. It's just the way of the universe to perceive through different forms, different levels of viability until it gets to something that works. So the position of the Tao sages is a lot closer to what you see here, to the ideas behind that the scientists will describe, like the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins, much closer to that than people who believe in intelligent design. So I wanted to compare and contrast. Now, as to where you fall in the spectrum between evolution and intelligent design, I leave that completely up to you. Not my job to tell you what's right and what's wrong. It's my job to open up this discussion and expose everyone to the different ideas, and then let everyone make up their own mind. So continue on with the Tao Te Ching. In line 2, it says, born before heaven and earth. So this is again talking about the Tao. So the Tao, this is a poetic way to say the Tao came into existence before everything else. Heaven and earth, in this case, standing in for the universe. So the formless Tao is the precursor of heaven and earth. Now, how did the Tao come about? Well, for all we know, nothing. It came from nothing, or it came into being on its own, or it has always existed. So remember, Tao sages do not claim to know anything about the origin of the Tao, if indeed it has an origin at all. So perhaps it cannot be said to have come into being. Perhaps it's always been there. We don't know, and we don't pretend to know. Now, in a similar way, the concept of God is also described as the causeless cause, or the uncaused first cause. And this is because the human mind grapples with this idea of cause and effect, and then tracing it back in time, there's got to be some kind of ultimate point that was the cause of everything. What is it? Well, in the Western mind, the label appended to that will be God. In the Eastern mind, it will be the source, and the name for that will be the Tao. So I point this out because these are similar ways for human beings to contemplate the issue of the ultimate origin, ultimate source. Where do we come from? How did it all begin? These are deep questions about the universe and about existence. These are philosophical questions that human beings have wrestled with for ages. So, along with this idea about creation, there's also the concept of what is known as the anthropic principle. That idea is basically that looking around, scientists have uncovered that the whole world, indeed the entire universe, seems tailor-made for human beings. So when they look at some of these constants that they find in nature, what they say is that these values seem to be fine-tuned for life, and specifically for human life. So it appears as if the universe has been designed specifically for you and me. That is the concept. The fine-tuned universe, the anthropic principle. So the question is, why is everything just right? So here's a greatly simplified explanation, just to give everyone the flavor, that when scientists look into the gravitational constant, they realize that the value of the gravitational constant is exactly what it should be in order for us to exist. If the gravitational constant is lower, then the stars will not be able to kick off thermonuclear fusion, which means they can't burn, they can't shine, the stars cannot shine, if that number was lower. If it was higher, the stars would burn bright. Definitely the thermonuclear fusion reaction would kick in, but then it will burn quickly. It will burn out in a short time before life has a chance to evolve. Therefore, the gravitational constant has to be exactly what it is, like just right. What they call the Goldilocks principle. Not too much, not too little, right in the middle, just right, in order for human beings to exist, in order for life to exist. So they look around and they see many other examples. There's this thing called strong force coupling constant. This is from physics as well. This is what is holding the particles together. So if that constant was weaker, then the only thing that can form would be hydrogen. It's a universe full of hydrogen and no other elements, which means life as we know it is not possible. If the constant was stronger, then all of the elements lighter than iron would be rare, which also means that life as we know it would be unlikely. So the value is just right. Lastly, the electromagnetic coupling constant, same thing. If it's weaker or stronger, molecules cannot form, which means life as we know it cannot exist. Now, there are many other factors just like this that people can point to, scientists can point to and say that those values are just right in order for us to exist. So when that is the case, question, isn't it obvious that the universe was carefully and intelligently designed, customized, tuned just for you and me? Isn't it obvious? Now, not everyone thinks that is the case. So, along with all the philosophical ideas that we're exploring that this chapter inspires, I want to give you another one that is specifically about this assertion, the assertion of the anthropic principle. And this is a useful analogy to know. So first of all, keep in mind, the basic idea of the anthropic principle is that the world fits us and our needs so well that someone must have created specially for us, like a deity, like a supreme being. And we don't even have to go into physics and look at these constants that you see in the slide to see the arguments about this. I mean, these constants, only scientists understand. Well, we don't know how to work those equations. So is there like another way for us to see the same idea? Well, we can look at the Earth. We can look at our world. We can look at the planetary orbit of the Earth around the sun. And we know that it's just right. It's in the Goldilocks zone. It's not too far from the sun, and it's not too close to the sun. If it's too close, we know that it will be too hot for life, like Venus and Mercury. If we're too far away from the sun, it will be too cold, like Mars and all the other planets. We're comfortable in the Goldilocks zone where life can happen. And not only that, you don't even have to look at astronomy. Here's the other thing that I would point out to you, and that is, when you look at our world, look at the animal kingdom, look at all the plants, look at all the animals, so much of it we can consume. Not only that, but so much of it is actually kind of tasty. Why? What is the reason for that? Well, some would say that, well, this is the argument to be an omnivore, to eat everything because we can consume everything and they all taste good. Well, these are all examples of the kind of thinking that philosophers and deep thinkers have actually dismissed, that they have looked at this whole thing and saw the problem with this way of thinking. So they are thinking more like Tao sages. So how would Tao sages see it? Well, I want to give you this particular analogy to think about. This is from Douglas Adams. He has passed away, but he came up with some remarkably interesting things, ideas for all of us. This one is called the puddle, and you may be puzzled as to what the puddle, what is that, and how is that supposed to bear on anything that we're talking about? We're talking about how the world seems to be custom designed for us. We're talking about how animals and plants, they're all edible to us. We can consume all of them. Some of them are really tasty. So, doesn't that mean we're meant to do that? We're meant to eat all that meat? We're meant to discard these ideas about becoming a vegan and so forth? Because after all, God made the whole world for us to consume. So that's the idea. And here's what Douglas Adams said about that. It's the exact same way that Lao Tzu looked at the question of about, what is the reason it seems like the whole world was made for me. So Mr. Adams says, we always ask ourselves why. Like, why is the world this way? We ask that question because we always look for intention. We always look for intention because we know that we use intention all the time. Like, for instance, we make a meal in order to eat it. So we look at the world, we look at the rocks, we look at the trees, and we wonder what the intention is here, even though in nature, there really isn't intention. It doesn't really have intention. And we like to think about, hey, this person who made this world intended for us. And this is the point where you think, well, the world fits me really well. The caves and the forests, the streams, the animals, all custom tailored just for me, or for human beings. I mean, there's no other conclusion that you can come to, right? And then Douglas Adams continues. You see, it's sort of like a puddle that is sentient, a puddle like this one that you see here, waking up one morning and thinks, well, this is this hole that I find myself in, this is a very interesting world. Interesting hole. It fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? See, I know me as a puddle, I know I'm about this big, and the hole is exactly the same size. It fits me staggeringly well. So neatly, so precise. It must have been made to have me in it. The hole must be made for me. So when you look at it like that, you can see the point. The hole, certainly we know, was not specifically designed. It was not made for the puddle. The puddle came around as water and filled the hole. Whatever the shape the puddle became was in response to the shape of the hole, not the other way around. So the puddle is pretty convinced that the hole was made for it, but that's the illusion. The reality is flowing water that filled the hole. So you can say that the puddle evolved to fill it precisely. So it's the same with human beings. We evolved to fill our niche in the ecology. Over time, we flowed into it, so to speak, and we did so very well that we begin to think the niche was created with us in mind. We think that it was customized for us. In reality, any dominant species that eventually came into power in a particular world, chances are pretty good that it has the ability to survive on any kind of food. That's what gives it the ability to go from one generation to the next, surviving disasters. So just because human beings had that ability to adapt, that does not mean that, for instance, animals were made to be eaten by human beings. No more than the hole was designed for the puddle, custom fitted to the puddle, like bespoke tailoring. But then you may say, it's kind of a nice thought though, right? That everything exists for us. I mean, what's the harm in thinking that way? So Douglas Adams points out that this is a powerful idea. So powerful, in fact, that human beings can become preoccupied with the notion. And that preoccupation can be quite negative. So suppose the puddle keeps thinking about how the hole is perfect fit and the sun rises. The puddle continues to tell itself the story about the hole being made to have him in it. And the sun is shining, the air is heating up, and the puddle is shrinking. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The puddle, while it is shrinking, frantically hangs on to the notion that everything's going to be all right, because after all, this world, this hole, was meant to have him in it, was built to have him in it. So the moment he completely evaporates and disappears, catches him rather by surprise. How does this apply to us? Well, if we think the world is here for us, if we cling to this rather dogmatic notion, we will continue to do damage and destruction to the world the same way that we have been destroying it. All along, smug and satisfied that we have dominion over everything in the world, all the plants, all the animals, everything. So the Tao perspective is different from the suggestion of the anthropic principle that the universe was carefully crafted, customized, and perfected for human beings. Remember, the Tao is all about nature, all about natural processes. The universe is the way it is because it came about naturally. That's the Tao. And when you look at it that way, you realize that far from being a comfortable environment for us, in reality, most of nature is hostile to our continuous existence. For most of the universe, which is empty space, we have no ability to survive in it without some kind of help. We can only survive in a tiny speck called Earth. And even on Earth, there are countless ways nature can kill us. If the predators don't get us, volcanic eruption, earthquakes, thunderstorm, tsunami, some of those may get us. Or an asteroid can come by and wipe us out. So the world, the universe, not exactly custom-made for our comfort, can be quite a dangerous place. We came about naturally. We have ingenuity. We have creativity that are aspects of the Tao. We utilize them to fit ourselves into the world. And that's how the precise fit happened, like the whole to the puddle, the world to us. So this is from The Salmon of Doubt by Douglas Adams, published in 2005. So even just when we stick to the creation of the world, of the universe, the difference from the Tao and the difference, I would say the divergence between Eastern and Western modes of thinking can be very interesting and can give a lot of food for thought. Okay, so just a little bit more and then we will take a mid-meeting break. Line 3 says, so silent, so ethereal. So if you take a look at line 3, you see a couple of characters that are the same. The second and last character, they are exactly the same. These are sentence ending punctuation mark like characters. In this case, they are supposed to be exclamation marks. So the first character is silence, quietude, and then ethereal. So in the Eastern paradigm, the Tao paradigm, the Tao itself is silent and ethereal. It's not a deity, so it says nothing to us. It doesn't talk to us. It has no active involvement in our lives. But because it's a combination of principles of the working of the world, if we follow the Tao, we naturally create benefits for ourselves. So any active involvement actually comes from us. So the activities, the engagement is on the human side and not on the Tao side. So in the previous few slides, we talked about how we have similarities in contemplating God as the causeless cause, as the uncaused first cause, and the Tao is the ultimate source. There are similarities between East and West. But here, we begin to see divergence. And that's because, historically, the Western conception of the Creator is not quiet and very much involved with human affairs. That is, the God of intervention and answering prayers. So that I personally find to be a fascinating topic as well. And I want to continue to compare and contrast the Eastern paradigm of the Tao with what we're used to in this society. But again, continue to keep it a balanced discussion. You know, not pointing to any one thing as ridiculous or any one thing as very good, but to draw differences and let everyone gain insights into the thinking of Tao sages. So what we left off is that the difference between the Tao and the Western conception of the creator. Here, what we're seeing is that the Tao is silent, ethereal. It does not get involved in human lives. In the Western concept, that's not the case. Then, we also have a description here, line 4, that the Tao is independent, 独立. It stands alone. It stands on its own because, by definition, it is everything. The Tao is everything. So it doesn't need or want anything, not to mention the fact that it doesn't have human emotions, and to want something, to need something, would be contrary to its nature. It cannot want anything any more than sunlight can want something. So, what about changeless? Well, actually, let me stay with independent for just a moment. What about independent? East versus West. So we know that the Western conception of the creator is infused with human-like characteristics. So God is described as seeking fellowship with human beings, and God is described as wanting humans to be good, to walk the righteous path. So whereas the Tao doesn't want anything, we can see that the Western conception of the creator is an entity that definitely wants certain things. Okay, what else? Independent, and then next, changeless. So the Tao is more like natural laws that operate the same way today as they did thousands of years ago. And in fact, not just thousands of years ago, but natural laws we're talking about operating the same way for the vast majority of all time, since the beginning. Not only that, but natural laws can be, for the most part, dependent upon to act, function, operate the same way for all time to come. So the Tao is eternal. The Tao is without change. What about the Western conception? In the West, you know and I know that we've gone through quite a few changes and revisions about the nature of God. We went in antiquity from many deities to one deity. From polytheism to monotheism. There's a legitimate discussion where people can say that, well, in actuality, what we call monotheism today is still polytheism due to the presence of Trinity, etc. Let's set that aside for now. We're painting with brushstrokes and with exaggerated contrast in order to bring out the paradigm of the Tao. So we've certainly changed from the wrathful entity of the Old Testament, where God says, "Vengeance is mine," to the loving, caring personality for modern times. So the New Testament, God has a very different feel than the Old Testament, so it's definitely gone through some changes. So whereas the Tao just is the creator, perhaps we didn't think about this in depth before, but the concept of the creator in Western traditions carries a whole bunch of other things along with it, like the desire for human fellowship and companionship, etc., the free will question, the omnipotence, omniscience, everything else. There's a lot going on. So I am glad to see that this discussion is actually well received by most of you guys, judging from the feedback that I'm getting. And you guys are making a very good point about the suitability of the universe for us. That is, and this point is excellent. Basically, what it says is that yes, we exist and we're able to contemplate these questions. But if the universe had the constants switched around or at different values so that life cannot exist, well, in that particular universe, there's not going to be life. There's not going to be anyone to think about what a perfect fit that universe is, or how well tuned that universe is. And that brings us right back to the puddle. So thank you very much for that feedback. Now, continuing on with the difference between East and West, again, exaggerated contrast. So in line 5, we're talking about circulating and ceaseless. So let's get right into that. When Tao sages observe nature, they use their observation to draw conclusions about the Tao. They see day turning into night, night turning back into day. They also see the change of seasons, and they see this year after year. They see day, night, they see that cycle continuing on, and they also see the cycling of the seasons year after year. Therefore, observing from that, they conclude the central characteristic of the Tao must be circular, cyclical, and it continues on indefinitely. And if the Tao is within us, if we take after characteristics of the Tao, particularly in our interactions with one another, then what it means is that the characteristics, the circular, the continuing on indefinitely part, that must apply to our interactions with one another as well, especially the karmic interactions, the cause and effect. And this is a good reminder for me to bring the discussion from the cosmic perspective back down to Earth. That is, we need to apply these universal concepts, these creation ideas behind mythology and so forth. We need to, at the end of the day, bring them back into our lives to talk about how we can apply them. That is the most important task to be accomplished in a discussion about the Tao. So let's take a look at line 6. Line 6 I find fascinating. Line 6 says, it can be regarded as the mother of the world. So what that is the Tao. The Tao can be regarded as the mother of the world. And we talked about the Tao being whatever it is that is the source of continuous creation in every level of reality. So regarded as the mother, question, why not regard it as the father? Why would we arbitrarily regard the Tao as the mother and not the father? In the West, the creator is seen as a father figure. So why wouldn't we do that with the Tao? Any ideas? So my answer is that the conception of the Tao is closer to a female maternal figure than the male image of traditional Western thought. I think everybody knows what I mean when I say the traditional male image. Here is the Michelangelo painting, The Creation of Adam. This is in the Sistine Chapel. So God is on the right-hand side, Adam on the left-hand side, and definitely envisioned as a father figure. So the basic idea is that the universe is the result of something that resembles birth rather than craftsmanship. So this is even getting further away. I think you can see the connection between this and our discussion on the intelligent designer. So the Eastern concept is more like birth, not something that was designed, not something that had a blueprint drawn up and then made from raw material and crafted into something. So yet another difference, East versus West, male versus female, birth versus making something, creating something in the context of building it. So now I want to take a look at line 7 and line 8 together. These are closely associated. So as you can see in the translation, it says, I do not know its name. Identifying it, I call it Tao. So let me focus on that. Here, the first character in line 7, Wu, that is the ancient form of I. So that means I. And then the next character means know. And then the character after that, third character means to know something. So this is the negation. So 吾不知, the first 3 characters means I don't know. That's Lao Tzu talking about himself. He doesn't know. And then 4th character, qi, its last character mean name. So literally that line can be literally translated as I don't know its name. I do not know its name. That's a literal translation. It can't really be translated any other way. So in order to identify, in order to be able to discuss this thing that has no name, that's nameless, I call it Tao. I call it Tao because it seems to be the way of existence, of reality, of the universe itself. So here's the bullet point. We have no idea. To be quite frank, we have no idea what the Tao is. We can say that these ceaseless cycles of continuous creation is the way things are. They just are. They're that way. So we call it the way because it's the way things are. Now, here's what I want to point out. Here's another difference between East and West. By calling it the way, as in the way of universal continuous creation, by calling it that, we're specifically saying that it's the way, it's not a being, it's not some sort of supreme being, not a person-like entity. It has no face, no emotions. It does not need our attention or worship. It does its own thing due to its nature. That's it. Full stop. Period. It just is. Whereas the Western conception of a creator, because of the infusion of human emotions, would also say, like in the New Testament, I'm a jealous God. You shall have no other idol before me. The Tao, no jealousy, no emotions. It's like you human beings can do whatever you want. It doesn't care. It doesn't matter to the Tao one way or the other. It could matter greatly to you and me, what happens to you? But the Tao will not intervene because the Tao does not care. All right, so the Tao just is. Let's move on. So Lao Tzu continues on to say, forced to describe it, I call it great. And here's how we can sort of like paraphrase what he's trying to say. Lao Tzu says, well, I don't know that much about it. So if I'm forced to describe it, I can only say it's great. It's only great it's great in terms of the scale, that the scale can be personal, it can be close at hand, or it can be vast, like, you know, solar system vast or galaxy size vast. So about the Tao, we know that nature is full of circular patterns, and some of those patterns are way bigger than we can really understand or grasp or hold in our thoughts. So when it's so big, when it's bigger than we can imagine or envision in our minds, when these circles are big enough, they will recede from view. That is, they will pass beyond visual range. We no longer see them. But that doesn't mean they're not there. They're making a great round trip to eventually come back to us, making a big circle. So these large, vast, circular functioning of the Tao is something that today we see more and more evidence. We see many more different ways, you know, because of science, because of technology, we see more ways than the ancients to validate this particular idea, this concept. So let me explain. First, let's take a look at these lines. Great means passing. Passing means receding. Receding means returning. What I'd like everyone to get a mental image of is that from these three lines, imagine something that is making such a huge circle that it's going away. It seems to disappear over the horizon, and then a long time later, it reappears again, and then it comes back, completing a circle. So definitely, we know from astronomy that heavenly bodies have circular orbits that are way bigger than we can imagine. So the Earth goes around the sun, and many other heavenly bodies, many other planets do so as well. In orbit around the Earth, we have plenty of satellites, man-made objects. They too have this huge circular orbits that goes beyond visual range. And here's another thing that science can tell us. Science says that the human body, like all material things, is made up of endlessly recycled molecules. So that's very true. These molecules are recycled. They go in circular fashion. That is, someone dies, their bodies disintegrate into component molecules, and they are recycled in various ways. Some perhaps become nutrients for plants. You know that's true. And some may end up becoming part of yet another person's makeup, one way or another. Now, scientists themselves will be even more extreme about the recycling nature of all these molecules that make up our bodies. So here's Carl Sagan. He says the nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. Long, long time ago. We are made of star stuff. Absolutely everyone. This applies to you, applies to me, applies to everyone you know. We're all made of star stuff. We're all recycled stars. So in different ways, planetary orbits, that's just one manifestation of the Tao, the circular nature of it. Another manifestation at a totally different scale, much smaller, much more limited in different fashion than planetary orbits, is the recycling of the molecules in our bodies. Now, Carl Sagan certainly is not the only one who points this out. Many other scientists have said the same thing. Here, I've got a similar statement from Lawrence Krauss, a physicist. So here's what he says. Every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You're all stardust. So once again, we are recycled molecules that originated from stars. And we will continue on. Every molecule in us will continue to be recycled in different fashion, different ways, but it's going to continue on indefinitely. So it's exactly like what this chapter says, that circular functioning, in this case, the recycling, goes on indefinitely. So another thing that Lawrence Krauss likes to say that's gone viral, he said, hey, forget about Jesus. A star died so that you could live. Let's move on. So we talked a lot about science today. I don't want this to be a science discussion. I want this to be a Tao discussion, which means that it has to be about life, about your life, about my life. So let's get away from science for just a moment and talk about something else. When we talk about this great circular movement, it's not just science, it's also everything else. For example, think about what happens when you learn something. When you try to master a new subject or a new skill, you go through phases. So initially, you are very ignorant. You don't have the skill. You don't even know what you need to learn. You don't know what you don't know. That's the beginning. As you learn more and more, you become aware of things that you have to learn. You become aware of your ignorance. Then you become more competent in mastering the new craft or the new skill, the new knowledge. Then you become aware of what you know. And then one day, when you are really well practiced, you transition to the realm of mastery. That is when you know that thing, that skill, that talents, that knowledge, and you don't have to be consciously aware of what you know. It's become a part of you. It'll just flow from you. So here's what it looks like. We always begin in this cycle, great circular fashion, we always begin in the upper left-hand corner, unconscious or unaware and incompetent, not aware of a skill you lack. The more you learn, the more aware you become, the more conscious you become of your incompetence. You become aware that you lack a skill. That's in the upper right corner. Then, as you work on it more, you're actively practicing a skill. You have to think about it. You have to remember to do something. You have to remember how to do it right. That is a skill that you're beginning to acquire. You're becoming competent at it, but you have to be conscious. You have to be consciously aware to do it. Lastly, let's go to mastery, which is the lower left-hand quadrant. Mastery is to be competent and skilled, so skilled, in fact, you don't have to think about it. So you don't have to be aware of it. You don't have to be actively conscious of the fact that you are doing something. It just flows. So this is a big circle. It takes time to travel in circular fashion like this. And this is only one level of the skill. When you've mastered that level, it may be that there are advanced levels for you to master. So you go right back to the upper left-hand quadrant, not really aware of what you are lacking, and then learning the advanced level skill, becoming aware that you lack it, and then continue to work on it until you know what it is, you can do it, but you have to think about it, and then finally mastering the advanced level as well. That mastery opens up even more of a bigger world so that you see there's still more that you can explore. So you keep going around in yet another circle and another one and another one. So the point is, the circular functioning of the Tao is manifesting here just like it is in planetary orbits, in cosmology, and everything else. So I mentioned human interactions a little while back. What about human interactions? What about karma? Well, when we look at how we interact with one another, we see what goes around comes around. Karma. There's no real getting away with anything. You pay for it one way or another. That just means karma may be describing a very big circle that it may recede from view. It may be out of the visual range. You can't see it anymore, but it's not gone. It hasn't disappeared. It's just too far away for you to see. At some point, it's going to come back and complete its big circle. That's karma. So I want to leave this section with a final thought, and then we'll move on to something else. But here's what I want to offer to everybody. So first, think about the molecules of your body that came from the death of stars and will continue to be recycled endlessly. That's the body. Now I want you to think about your spirit, the consciousness aspect of you rather than the physical aspect of you. Here's the thought. If the true nature of your body is endlessly recycled molecules, then perhaps the true nature of your mind is the endlessly journeying consciousness. Maybe that is what you really are. It's worth a thought. So let's move on. We now have from 13 down to 18, you can see the Tao is great, heaven is great, earth is great, the sovereign is also great. There are 4 greats in the universe and the sovereign is one of them. The sovereign occupies one of them. Let's decrypt this. This part is not as easy to understand as the other parts. So this part is where I can be of more help. So let's start with line 13. The Tao is great. What is that? What does that mean? So the Tao is great because it encompasses all aspects of existence. So indeed, everything we have learned from science and observation of life confirms. So next, we want to tackle the rest of the lines all at once. And here's how we can do that. Let me show you what I mean. Laozi introduces the three conceptual levels, the three ways to think about life and existence and reality. The top level is the level of the Tao or nature. So I've got Tao / nature. There's going to be times when Tao is synonymous with nature, that Tao and nature can be used interchangeably. Sometimes that's the case. There's also going to be times for those of us who subscribe to or are not ready to let go of the supernatural, then the Tao encompasses both the natural and the supernatural. Okay, I just want to make sure I get that out there. Okay, so at a level below Tao nature is the level of heaven and earth. And in this particular chapter, heaven and earth are broken up to be talked about separately. But heaven and earth is basically the stage upon which the drama of life plays out. Finally, we get to the level of the individual or the sovereign. Here, Laozi is actually making a point that the ruler is you. The ruler is the individual human being who is cultivating the Tao. So I'll explain how we can know that. For now, though, keep your mind on just the three levels. I'm going to create a correspondence here. As you can see, the first level, Tao and nature, that corresponds to line 13, the Tao is great. I think everyone can see that. So line 2, which lines do you think level 2, heaven earth, will correspond to? (14) and 15. That's the second level. Okay, now the last level, which is the individual and the sovereign level, this is the human being level. What lines would the third level correspond to? (16, 17, and 18). So what's going to happen right after line 18 is that Laozi will start talking about not the ruler, but individual human beings. So that makes it clear that the advice that he gives to the ruler, to the king or the emperor, is actually advice for the individual reader of the Tao Te Ching. So let's zoom in on the ruler. So taking a look at this character is Wang. So Wang, you can see, is the first character in line 16 and the second character in line 18. Wang means king ruler, sovereign. It is also a surname. So when you know someone whose surname is Wang, this is the surname. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are the descendants of kings or rulers. It's a surname. It's exactly the same as the English surname King. You probably know people with that surname. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are descendants of ancient kings. So exactly the same situation here. Now, Wang in 16 and 18 appears to be talking about the ruler, but is actually talking about the sovereign, which is you. So let's be explicit. You are the ruler. You are sovereign because ultimately you answer only to yourself. The buck stops with you, so to speak. There's no one to blame. You must take charge. You must take full responsibility. This is true because of the following. Because you always have the power to determine how you react to external events. You always have the power to determine the meaning of external events, the meaning they hold for you. Something bad happens, it can mean to some people that they ought to be crushed and depressed. The same event to another person can mean that they should be galvanized into action, that they should be motivated to prevent a similar mishap or tragedy from happening again. So that difference is what creates life-altering, life-transformational changes. So to grasp onto that power, the power to take charge, the power to be responsible, is to be sovereign. So here's the position from Lao Tzu and other Tao sages. The admonition from Lao Tzu is that you must see through the common illusion of not being in control. What I mean by that is that you probably come across people like this every day, people who complain about things happening to them. They feel like they are on the receiving end of bad things. But if they see through the illusion, realize that they are in control, they can, number one, take charge of their own emotional states. Number two, take charge of what the event means to them and choose the empowering meaning accordingly. The meaning that will bring about the most benefits, the most positive energy. Then they will be exercising their divine right to rule as a monarch in their personal kingdom. So that's the deeper layer of meaning here from 16 down to 18. Okay. So hard to believe, but we're bearing down on the last four lines. The last four lines require quite a bit of explanation as well, because it's not that easy to see what it means to follow the laws, etc. This requires more interpretational work, and I will guide you through it. But basically, from 19 down to 22, you've got humans follow the laws of Earth. Earth follows the laws of heaven. Heaven follows the laws of Tao. Tao follows the laws of nature. So you have these repeating lines, but what do they actually mean? Let's break it down. First of all, up and down the four lines, we have the second character. Let's talk about what that is. Fa. What does it mean? Laws or principles, dharma in Buddhism. So dharma is a whole new realm. It's about manifestations. It's about the cosmic principles of Buddhism. So we'll leave that alone for now. Let's stick to laws for the present time. So in this particular context, the meaning of fa is extrapolated to following, as in following the law or a principle. So it's not just humans, laws, earth. It's humans following the laws of earth. And the reason why following is being used in this context is because Lao Tzu is using this character fa to describe this cosmic order that links the three levels. The three levels you have already seen: Tao, nature, heaven, earth, individual, sovereign. They are connected, and they are connected through this character fa. So let's begin with 19. Humans follow the laws of the earth. What does that mean? So here's the meaning. Humans are heavily influenced and affected by the environment. So there's a couple of examples that I'll give you here. First, physical setting determines suitable places to live. In fact, this is the foundation of feng shui. I recently received multiple questions on feng shui, indicating that people are still quite interested in this topic. People like to ask, what do I think about feng shui? And I tell them the truth. Feng shui started out as a set of principles around powerful truths that are very practical, and they're supposed to be very helpful to find the best place, the most ideal place to live, or to help you rearrange your environment so that it can become more ideal. Over the centuries, feng shui has acquired layer after layer of contrivance and artificiality, to the point where the original essence is oftentimes forgotten. And the original essence is very close to the Tao. I will give you some examples in just a moment. So we're talking about humans following the laws of Earth. Here's another interpretation about what that means. Geography determines boundaries. Rivers, lakes, oceans, mountains, cliffs, and canyons, these are geographical obstacles that can help determine where one particular kingdom ends and another one begins. So for instance, two neighboring kingdoms may be divided by a river between them. It's like a natural barrier, a natural separation. So in general, since historical times, the difficulty of going anywhere from one place to another is what determines the extent to which the groups of people, countries, tribes, regions, whatnot, how they are separated and how they isolate themselves from one another. So two good examples for this whole idea of human beings following the laws of the earth. It just says that the earth, the terrain, the environment in which you live has a huge impact on human beings. Okay, and then I want to spend a little more time to talk about feng shui, to explain how feng shui reflects on ren fa di, humans following the laws of the earth. how this is the basis of feng shui. So, for example, when you are searching for the ideal place, remember, this is ancient China we're talking about, the birthplace of feng shui. So as you look around to find where you should build your house, you want to make sure, number one, that it's not too far away from sources of water. You're going to need water all the time. So you don't want to be too far away from a river or a lake or stream, or maybe even wells. Number two, you want to be sure that you are not building so high up a mountain or a hill where the winds are too strong. That's not going to make for a comfortable dwelling. You want to be in a place that has flowing air, like a light breeze. That would be the ideal of feng shui. Number three, you don't want to be too low or too near the river, because then you expose yourself to the danger of flooding, to the risk of flooding. So especially in ancient times, before they really got control of the various flooding channels, the possible flooding channels of a river, you wanted to be close to the river so you can have easy access to water, but at the same time, you also don't want to be too close. And number four, the house ideally should face south. This is ancient China we're talking about. And what that means is that in wintertime, it will have its back against cold winds from the north while getting more sun from the southern part of the sky. That's feng shui. What this means is that when you go to the southern hemisphere, whether it's South America, Australia, what you have to do with number four is to flip it around. The house should face north so that in wintertime for South America or Australia, it'll have its back against cold winds from the south while getting more sun from the northern part of the sky. So this is the extent to which human beings follow the laws of Earth. That is, are influenced or affected by the Earth. Line 20. 地法天, Earth follows the laws of heaven. How can we interpret that? Well, we can see the Earth follows heaven in the following context. Number one, there's weather, constantly changing weather, whether it's wind or rain or snow or whatever. Changing weather shapes the terrain, which is Earth, through erosion from exposure to the elements. Well, we certainly know that. We certainly know that as a fact. That's happening all the time. So in that respect, Earth follows the laws of heaven. It is shaped by heaven. 2, temperature, which is yet another aspect of weather. So it's an attribute of heaven. Temperature extremes, too hot or too cold, affect all life, whether it's plant life or animal life. Now it can be affecting life differently. So when it gets too hot, the plants love it, but the animals do not. Rain, which is yet another thing from heaven. Rain from heaven nourishes all plants, nourishes animals too. So this is yet another way that the Earth has to follow heaven. It is dependent on heaven. And lastly, this is especially important to ancient agrarian societies, which ancient China was. So the changing of seasons, which is certainly heaven. determines the timing for planting and harvesting, and that's Earth. So not a big surprise there. If you are a farmer, you must watch the changing of seasons and determine your own schedule accordingly. What to do when. So these are all the different ways that Earth follows the laws of heaven. I think that makes it very clear. So what about line 21? Heaven follows the laws of Tao. What could that mean? 天法道. So whenever we talk about heaven, it is important to recognize that heaven covers a wide range of subjects. Meteorology, the weather, astronomy, the sun, the moon, the stars, cosmology, the universe itself, astrophysics, everything, everywhere, and so on. So heaven covers a lot of ground. So all of these different areas of study, these different heavenly manifestations, they all follow the Tao. So we're talking everything from weather patterns, meteorology, to orbital mechanics, and beyond. They all follow the Tao. So here's what we know for sure. We may not all be rocket scientists. I'm not a rocket scientist. I don't know orbital mechanics. But I do know that there are reasons behind all the heavenly manifestations. Even when we don't understand what's going on, we know science will solve more and more as time goes on. And like I said, I want to make sure we apply this to life. So I'm going to need to emphasize that it's the same. It's exactly the same with life. We may not understand everything that's going on in our lives right now, but continuing cultivation guarantees that as time goes on, we will understand life more and more. We will reduce the unknowns in life. So we are getting close to the end of this chapter. Line 22 is the last line. Now, line 22 requires quite a bit of discussion as well, so we can't just dive right into it. We have to instead bring our meeting to a close and talk about the summary. Fortunately, we've talked enough, so the summary covers pretty much everything that we have discussed. The first big point, the first important point, is that creation is the way of existence. That's why the Tao is the way. The nature of the Tao is exactly that, continuous creation. So the second bullet is by far the most important one in the summary. I want you to see yourself as an engine of creation in your life. And I want you to direct the operation of this powerful engine. Number two, Tao is just a label. So keep in mind the words of Lao Tzu from this chapter. Lao Tzu says, well, I don't know what the name is, so I'm just naming it as a label of convenience. It's meant to facilitate discussion. With a label, you can begin to talk about it. You can begin to exchange your ideas on what the Tao is or isn't, how it works or does not work. So first, don't get too attached to it, number one. Number two, not written in the summaries, but equally important, is to be careful of the traps that inexperienced students of the Tao in the West will fall into. For instance, one particular student says, well, see, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. That means we should not talk about the Tao at all. And those that talk about it, they just don't get it. That is completely wrong. The Tao was something that Lao Tzu says, specifically in this chapter, that he needed to identify it. He needed to label it. And the purpose for that is to facilitate discussion. So the very thought that we should not talk about the Tao is the very opposite of what the ancient Tao sages really want. Number 3, and the last point, being sovereign. So look around. Your assignment is to look around and notice how people assume things just happen to them and they're powerless. They're powerless to stop or to do anything about these bad things that happen to them. Your assignment is to notice that and train yourself to be the very opposite. So your mission is to be the sovereign in your own life. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.